Everybody ready? Very good. Okay, thanks. Welcome back, and this is the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen. We're resuming our meeting, and our next interview was with Jim Kreidler. So, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's great to see you. For the format, we're going to give you some time for an opening statement. You've got some time to sort of explain why you're interested in Yarmouth and some of your background, who you're here, a little bit about your interests, and we'll do round robin Q&A with board members, and then we'll give you a chance to make some closing comments, and that will pretty much be the format for the rest of the afternoon here. So,
excellent.
Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, thank you for having me. My name is Jim. I'm a wash ashore. I know that my other two candidates are local guys, and I know them. I know their work. They're outstanding quality candidates. So I think you're in a situation where you're not going to do wrong for the community no matter how you go. I happen to believe I'm the better choice, personally, and I'd like to spend the next hour and a half or so telling you why. But very briefly, I've been 31 years in public service. I consider it an honor to serve the public. It's something that I've chosen to do. It's something that I have continued to choose to do each day that I get up in the morning. Sometimes it's harder than others, depending on how the selectmen's meeting went the night before, but I continue to love the work that I do. I try to make it a focus with the team members that I get to work with, that we all recognize that it's an honor to do this work, that this isn't just about a job, it's about public service, that there are people that work very hard in our communities to provide for their families, and a portion of the money that they earn pays for all that we do, and in turn cycle back out in terms of services, and we owe them our best every day in that regard. Very briefly, I'm a Massachusetts guy, born and raised. Got my bachelor's degree from Columbia University in political science down in New York City, and began working in public service directly after that. It's not shown on my resume, but I worked for the Boston Housing Authority. Commuted from Yarmouth, actually, up to Mattapan every day in the summer months on my Honda CB 350 motorcycle. That's just not a fun thing to think about anymore. But shortly after that, I got a position working for a mayor up in Central Mass as a chief of staff assistant. Did that for about 5.5 years. Transitioned to a town administrator position in the town of Ayr when Fort Devens had just been closed, and there was a super town meeting of the 3 neighboring communities to plan the reuse, a 25-year reuse plan. That was a very exciting time. I did about 5.5 years there. From there, went to the town of Winchendon and spent 15 years working as the town manager in Winchendon. And from Winchendon, went to the town of Townsend, where I'm currently working, and I've been just over 5 years there. You might notice that geographically, those communities, if you've looked at the map or if you're a traveler, are all about 25 or 30 minutes max from the little town of Ashburnham, where I live. And that's because the commitment I made to my wife and to my kids, married 22 years and 5 kids, was that I wouldn't take a position that was beyond about a half-hour commute from the house while we were raising the kids. Wanted to be able to, if the school nurse called and my wife was off with a client, be able to get to the school and provide care and comfort for my family. If I had a selectmen's meeting on a given night, I could fly home and have dinner with the family, do some homework with one of the kids, and then still get back and do my job. So it was a quality of life decision to stay within North Central Massachusetts. 3 of the kids are grown adults and through their undergrad degrees and out in the world being contributing members of society. I've got a senior and a next month 16-year-old, and it's at this point now that, from my family's perspective, everybody's old enough and secure enough that I can venture out and stretch my wings a little bit. So why Yarmouth? that's a pretty good flight, right? I don't know how much you realize when you're that close to it, what you are. You know, sometimes we're victims of not being able to see the forest for the trees. But the opportunity right now in the town of Yarmouth to do really important, generationally impactful things is really exciting. You know, I think so much of it, if not nearly all of it, centers around water. And, you know, whether it's the environmental side of being able to sewer portions of the community in phases and, you know, reverse the degradation of the groundwater. Capital projects like working with the state to expand the abutments on Route 6 on the Bass River so you get better nitrogen flush. Those types of things that don't seem particularly sexy when you talk about them like that, but when you get distance and look back and see that this, again, is stuff that is going to make a real and lasting impact generationally for not just you, your kids, but your kids' kids and theirs. The spinoff of that, which I think is really, really important right now in Yarmouth that attracts me, is it's very infrequently that you get developers and environmentalists to share a common purpose. And you have an opportunity right now in Yarmouth to have that happen. You've got, in the first phase of sewering with DHY, you've got incredible development opportunities along 28 particularly that are being provided for based on an environmental issue, the sewering. And the fact that environmentalists want the groundwater protected and cleaned, and developers want to be able to adaptively reuse those parcels is just the type of thing that a guy like me that's been doing this for 30 years salivates over, because it's an opportunity to bring all of your skills to the table, all of the bits and tricks that you've learned over the course of your career, everything in your toolbox, and have one palette in front of you that you're able to contribute as a team player in getting that all taken care of and done. So that's a little bit about where I've been and why I think I'd like to be here, and I'd be blessed and honored if you'd pick me. So
That's great, thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr.
Our first question, we're going to start with Mr. Dan Horgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell us just maybe some of the successes, some of the failures that you've had in your past positions as a town administrator, and how they inform you as a town administrator going forward today?
absolutely. I'll start with failures. I fail every day. As a human being, I get up and I promise myself I'm not going to fail, and inevitably, invariably, I do something where I wish I hadn't, and I promise that I'll get up tomorrow and do it better. But in this business, failures can be magnified, because it's not just, you know, if I paint outside the lines when I'm painting my daughter's room last weekend. This is the people's money and the people's services. In 2002, I have a great example for you. I had a police chief when I was working in the town of Winchendon. He was a young and new chief, and his department union members had given a vote of no confidence, both the frontline guys and the brass, and the Board of Selectmen above me had voted no confidence, which put me in the middle of a situation that was not very comfortable. The departmental budget was in a really rough way. I had been there about 9 months. Called him in to talk about it, and he informed me that he had been activated with his National Guard group, and he gave me a letter to that effect, and it said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask or contact my commanding officer, sergeant, name, and phone number. I'd wished that he wasn't going to go, because things were really, really in rough shape, but I recognized this is the obligation that he has. A day later, a member of his department told me that he hadn't been activated, that he had volunteered to go. So I called him and asked him about it, and he said, no, I get activated. The department member doubled down and said, no, he's lying to you. I called his commanding officer, and the commanding officer confirmed that he had volunteered. It was real. It was more dangerous than anything I've done in my life. He had an assignment that he chose to go and do in Salt Lake City. So fast forward the tape, that being untruthful led to several other comments that he made that were not truthful to both me and to the board, and he was terminated. You fast forward the tape, it was a civil service department. He, at the end of the civil service hearing, he was restored to patrol officer and given no back pay, which was one of those half a loaf type things. If you've determined that having been untruthful means you can't be a police officer, then how are you putting him back as a police officer? That's fine. So the selectmen decided to appeal that decision. He filed a civil suit, and the lesson that I have learned is that there is a federal law called USERRA that I wasn't as familiar with as I should have been, that stands for the proposition that if you are given notice that an employee of yours has been activated, deployed, volunteered, you lock your lips. And notwithstanding an offer to please contact my supervisor in writing with a phone number, you can't do it. And this was in 2002. September 11th had happened a short number of months ago. He had a very effective civil attorney, and at the end of the day, the insurance company ended up paying out a settlement because it looked very much like the town and I were picking on him for trying to serve his country. So what did I learn? I learned that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, that I was focusing very narrowly on what was in front of me, which was an employee performance issue and untruthfulness, and I wasn't looking broadly enough to figure out what the impacts were beyond that from his military service perspective. I've not made that mistake since 2002 again. Another, which I'll probably talk about a little bit later, also in the town of Winchendon, after 15 years working there, we had a financial crisis, and the lead up to the crisis, I would not do the same if given the opportunity. There were things that, in hindsight, I look back at and realize that I could have and should have done differently. But I'd like to spend a little more time, if I get a chance later, talking about that in a little bit more detail. But those are two things that jump out most readily, Selectman Horgan, about failures or mistakes. Successes, every day there's a success. I chose work in local government because we're closest to the people that we serve. In the federal government, it's so hard to actually see the people you're impacting, and the same on the state level. But here, for good or bad, the impact of your actions on people. So every day when, someone's coming into the office and they've got their issue and you're able to rectify it, those are the wins. Those are the things that feel really good. But there's one project in particular that I consider a legacy project that I'm really proud of, which was the town that I was working in wanted to have an industrial development done at a certain area in town. They voted it as part of the master plan, and it was very exciting. They didn't take into account that they didn't own any land, and that it made a lot of sense on paper, but in practice it was difficult. But I'm a very competitive person. If you want to ask strengths and weaknesses, that'll be both for you. That's that cheesy answer when it's the same thing. So I actually set to work, and I was able to identify that there was a parcel of land in that location that was on a state-numbered highway that was about 100 acres owned by a developer. And I had a good relationship with the developer. He had done a lot of work in town, but it had no frontage. There was a piece blocking getting it to the highway, and that was owned by a land trust that was notorious for not answering the phone. Just, we own these things, we grow trees, we cut trees, we take tax benefits, and don't bother me. I found out that there was a piece of land that the town owned adjacent to some of their other holdings that was kind of like the missing piece in a Tetris game that they really would love to have. We had owned it since the 30s in tax title, and I don't think anyone walked it, knew we even owned it. I was able to cobble together a deal where we had appraisals done, found equal value, traded them the piece through town meeting, traded them the piece that's out in the middle of nowhere adjacent to their holdings. They flipped us the piece with the frontage, which opened up that back 100 acres. We were then able to negotiate a deal through our redevelopment authority with that private landowner that he would do the infrastructure work, the roadway, the water, and electric all underground on his dime in return for that access. We got a federal USDA loan and a state Moore loan, which is now Mass Works, and we brought the water down and then the redevelopment authority leveraged some parcels that town meeting had transferred to them, took out a mortgage and brought three-phase power down, and out of nothing, other than a paragraph on a master plan that might have looked like something that was just a nice idea that couldn't happen, we have a functioning industrial park in that community now, and one of the largest manufacturing companies that was set to move that year across the border into New Hampshire recommitted to the community and has grown, and those jobs have not only been preserved for the local residents, but they've been increased. So that's the one that I'm, I think, most proud of.
Thank you.
That was a long answer, I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
No, that's good. Next question, Tracy Post.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
This way, through the glass.
And now I just noticed for the people at home that we've been given a very nice packet here of information, and two of the questions that I've asked are in here, but for the sake of the public, maybe we could talk about it. When you look at Yarmouth, can you give us a brief overview of what SWOT, of what your analysis of a SWOT for us would be?
I touch on it in there, but I don't actually make the pretty four-quadrant thing.
Okay.
So let me actually, I'm going to slide so I can see you because you're getting garbled through the glass here.
Does it make me look skinnier? Because if it does, go back that way.
If I do this right in the middle.
There you go. That's perfect.
Only water. I mean, I put water primarily in each of the quadrants as a strength, a weakness, an opportunity, and a threat, for different reasons, obviously. I mean, water is obviously a strength because the economy, the heritage, the fabric of the community has been predicated upon its location, with both fresh and salt water being integral. So I think that it's such a strength for the community economically. I don't think, by the way, that it's even begun to be fully tapped and realized. I spent a lot of time in my 30, 60, 90-day draft entry plan talking about blue economy and just what I think are really exciting opportunities, particularly with the redevelopment of 28 after sewering, to pivot hardcore into blue economy. But water is a strength. Both from a quality of life perspective, having clean water, having it from an economic perspective. I think it's a strength that you have tri-town buy-in to sewering so you can clean the water. I think it's important that you have state buy-in. I think it's critically important that you get town meeting buy-in. Details are left to be figured out, obviously, on exactly how funding gets cobbled together to not impact the tax rate. But I think that's a strength entirely. I think it's a weakness, water, because if you don't capitalize on the opportunity that seems to come up every decade to sewer and do it now, it may be too late. And if groundwater levels continue to, with nitrogen loading, particularly in phosphorus or the other chemicals that are now being found and traced and tracked, if they continue to load and groundwater gets impacted to the point that you can no longer have potable water in people's private homes, property values go down. And although we play a game in this business with property values and tax rate such that we're always going to get your money, everybody follows that. For those following at home, if you don't, it's a little secret. If property values are up, the tax rate is here. If property values go down, the tax rate goes up a little bit such that it's always offset. So water's not good. Property value is going to go down. People are leaving their homes, selling their homes, and you no longer have the tax base to support what you've got going on as current level of services. So it's a weakness in that regard if it doesn't get addressed. I think the opportunity is just phenomenal to get sewered, to get economic development, to pivot towards a future type of economy, a blue economy. I think is again the type of stuff that generationally will be looked back on. Your leadership as being something that is a bright line in the town's timeline of progression and development. Strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. Obviously, it's a threat if you don't do it. Period. Full stop. Both economically and from a public health and environmental perspective.
Thank you.
That's great. The next question, Mike Stone.
Hello, Jim. Nice to see you again.
You as well.
I want to talk to you a little bit about management, if I can. obviously, your role as the town administrator would be to supervise the employment of actually the entire staff, probably primarily in most instances through your department heads. And how would you ensure that these department heads were operating for the greater good of the enterprise as opposed to each just working within their own particular department? For whatever reason, maybe the department head likes his own independence, maybe he's trying to carve out his little separate territory, but losing perhaps sight of the overall function of town government. How would you deal with situations like that if you were to encounter them?
Sure. Thank you. I actually have had to deal with things like that, and it's actually been back to being a competitive guy. It's actually been something that I've challenged myself with each time I've entered into a new organization, to identify people in the organization that aren't quite rowing in the same direction. They're not necessarily doing, they're not firing shots at the boat, but they're not really doing what everyone else on the team is doing based on the directive from the board above. I start with the supposition that they didn't get into to public service for the wrong reason. They get into it out of a want or a desire to serve. And based on that, it becomes my job, our job, yours to set the policy and me to convey it. But it becomes my job to make certain that I find a way to make that resonate with them again. Because it had at one point, and at some point it went off track. And I firmly believe it didn't go off track by and large because they wanted it to, that they woke up one day and said, I'm going to be, recalcitrant, and I'm going to turn the other way, and I'm going to put walls up. I think that over time, if there's a lack of communication and a lack of direction and touching in every now and again and affirmation of those things that are being done that are good and recognition of those things that are not going well, if you don't do that on a regular and recurrent basis, it allows people to feel like they're not being paid attention to, therefore they may as well just do what seems to be the easiest or what they think is the right thing to do. So I don't blame people that are in that situation when I come into an organization, because I think it's been our fault that we've allowed that to happen, that we haven't kept, it's a terrible analogy, but it's a good one. You ever been at a daycare where they're walking the kids out to the park and there's that long rope with all the little hooks on it that the little kids are holding on to? It's an interesting illustration because that's done so where all the kids are at all time. And they're going in the same direction that you want them to be going in. And to a certain degree, as a manager or as an administrator, the same exists. You've got to make certain that you know where everybody is and that they know, more importantly, where that middle rope is taking them. And if they stray and they pull off, you got to be able to know at the time that it happens and tug them back on. Because I believe they want to do right. They want to be on the team. They want to go in the right direction. But they haven't been given the guidance or the direction.
As a follow-up.
Yes, go ahead.
2 parts. How do you get them back on the rope, so to speak? And what happens if, despite your efforts, they keep straying?
I mean, ultimately, I sound like I'm talking, namby-pamby flowery stuff here about, kids and ropes and, playgrounds. But no, ultimately, if against all best efforts to communicate, Mike, this is what the Board of Selectmen has said you're going to do in your department. And, we've made efforts, we've communicated, it's been clear. We had a performance improvement plan last year when you didn't do it right, and you've fallen short of that performance improvement plan. We're now talking about last chance agreements. Really want to salvage you. You got 20 years here. Your knowledge is so important to us. We've invested in you. But at the end of the day, we're at the end of the rope. And if you don't come on board, you got to get off the boat. So.
Thank you.
Good. Eric Tolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How are you, Jim?
All right.
It's good to see you again.
You too.
In your opening statement, you made reference to your skills and the tools you have available to you in your toolbox. Could you provide for us one or two specific skills or specific tools that you have available to you in your toolbox that would make you a valuable asset to Yarmouth?
Yeah, one thing you learn about me, if we're able to work together at some point, is I don't often talk about my skills and I this and I can do that and this is what I can do for you. I'd much rather be able to demonstrate it, which is why I put the time I did into the paperwork I gave you, and why I wanted you to be able to see that stuff instead of me up here taking 15 minutes at a crack and just stroking myself.
Well, this is your chance.
Yeah, but
And the people at home want to hear it, too.
but I don't want to, okay? I guess the simplest thing I can say to you, Eric, is that I herd cats well, okay? And that, I say this respectfully, that goes up the chain as well as down. I've worked for 5-member boards as well as 3-member boards, and you're 5 different people that come from 5 different places in the world in your thinking and where you think the town should go, and are representing different factions in the community. I mean, at any given time, an administrator could be looking at 5 different opinions on something that he or she knows needs to be done. So it's an art form to be able to talk through that, to mediate, to in part of my document here, there's some discussion about educating. It's actually in tab F. It's my management style, and it's another cute acronym for you. It's TEAM, but it's talk, educate, adjust, and measure. So I guess to give you a couple of skills there, it's the ability to talk to people and hear them, make sure that the talking is going both ways, and be open to be educated. I need to be open every day to be educated by you, to know what you want as individuals and then collectively as a board. But also I need to be educated to know that you're thinking X, Y, Z, and the police chief knows based on his education that it's really, 1, 2, 3. So I need to be educated up and down the chain and open to that in order to be able to be effective. And the next is adjust. You need to be able to adjust in real time, not get so stuck on, concretized goals that in real life things change. So being able to adjust, and then ultimately at the end, M in team is to measure. You need to be able to have measurement to know that the goals you've laid out have been met for your purposes of the greater good of the town, whether it's for your reelection or whatever it is, but there's a measurement. The box is checked, that got done. I need to be able to demonstrate for you that box is checked and that work got done. It needs to be measurable. And department heads and employees beneath, they also need to be able to be measured in terms of their performance on a regular basis. So we know that everybody knows what the issue is. It's been talked out. Everybody's educated each other along the way. We've made adjustments based on that education. Then we set to work and measure the result. And that sounds a little more technical than herding cats, but that's what that is.
I got it. Thank you.
You said, Eric?
I am. Thank you.
Very good. One of the things that the assistant is going to have, or excuse me, the town administrator is going to have to deal with is the question of an assistant town administrator. That's a vacancy that has to be filled. I'm just curious if you can sort of share with us your thoughts about how to approach that position and what you'd be looking for.
Certainly. First thing, to take it away from that position for a moment. I have been in positions where I've had appointing authority, unchecked appointing authority that within a certain period of time goes before the board, and the board can either pocket approve or affirmatively vote to approve or affirmatively vote by a quantum to kick back. In 30 years, I've never once put a person before the Board of Selectmen and had it kicked back. I wouldn't do that to the person, but more, I wouldn't do it to you. Because generally, you're in local government, you're going to be pulling from local people. And it's unfair of me to put a local person up if I have reason to believe it's not going to pass, for that person, because they've still got to go to church, and they still have to go to the, to the scouts and to the Little League field, and for you, because you too are going to bump into them in the supermarket, and it's going to be awkward, right? So I'm going to make an assessment of whatever position is, the assistant or any other, as to who best fits the needs for the community at that time, based on all the other team members around. If we've got, 4 or 5 aces on the mound, I'm probably not going to pick a pitcher, right? You got to know who you've got on the team and what their strengths are, and then fill that available position. But I'm going to talk to you constantly leading up to it and well before I ever submit a name, because the last thing we need is create ill will on either side of that equation.
Okay, thank you. But just a follow-up, and that has to do with the whole question of professional development and training and the interest in promoting from within. Can you comment a little bit on that and share some insight in terms of your thinking about professional development, succession, and so forth?
Absolutely. One of the, and Mike and Eric will laugh because they teased me about it during my first interview, SMILE. The acronym that I showed you in my my resume, and I've updated again in the document that I gave you today. It's an acronym again that just it helps me in my public administration philosophy. So SMILE, it begins with S, ends with E, and those are the two poles that I really take my rooting from and my guidance from. One is service. I truly have a servant's heart. I'm doing this because I love the honor of being able to do it. And the E is ethics. So service is what I do, and ethics is how I do it. So those are the two poles. But to get to your point, Mr. Chairman, the M is mentor, and it's about training up those in the organization, investing in those in the organization. I don't know how much you're aware about what it looks like in trying to fill municipal positions at the administrative professional level, but there are fewer and fewer people going into it. Editorial note, enter Facebook, where you get your teeth kicked in every day online when you're in this public space. It makes it difficult, right, to fill these positions. So it's my belief that you have to train up and mentor from within. You have to provide funding sufficient for professional development, but you don't do it indiscriminately. Again, it's that talking and education continually to know that somebody is truly committed and they want to take that next step. And if they want to take the next step, you knowing that they're capable of the next step and having a sense of where they might be landing when they get to that next step. But it's imperative that you mentor and you train up from within.
That's great, thank you. The next question is Dan Horgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Every town deals with the complexity of fighting for dollars with their relative school systems. Here in Yarmouth, we are part of a regional school system. Do you have any past experience dealing or working with regional school systems? And how would you propose to work with the superintendent of schools and with our partner town dentists to ensure that we're providing a quality education, yet not at the expense of town services?
Excellent question, and the answer is I would have a magic wand, because that's the only way you're doing that. Think about it. The only constitutionally required service that the state of Massachusetts has to provide is a free and public education. That's all they got to do. All this other stuff is extra. It's good. I mean, I'm not knocking the state. They do great stuff. The only thing they're required to do is education, and it's the one thing they fail most miserably at. And the way the dynamic is set up is it pits us against each other, town versus gown. There's only this many dollars, and you need too many of them, and I need some of those back, and we end up kicking each other under the table. And the trap we fall into, and I'll give you another failure. I have failed at this. The trap we fall into is we only address this when budget is coming up and when town meeting is coming up, and you're having meetings the day of town meeting, in the parking lot trying to cut a deal. I mean, it's crazy when you think something as important as the education of our kids, the next generation. I mean, think about this. The last time meaningful education reform was done was in 1993. There was 29 graduating classes since then that have been victims of our inability to do it right. So, I mean, I worked for a mayor right out of college, and he was a if Archie Bunker had a conservative cousin, it would be this guy, right? I love him to death. He's one of my dearest friends. But he said, Jimmy, we will always lose the fight because they have better hostages. And that's a horrible thing to say, but it is so true. Because when you're up and you're arguing amongst yourselves with each other, how do you put, mowing the sides of the streets or clearing brush at the park against little Johnny being able to, have heat in the classroom? You can't. It's done. So, to your point, Mr. Organ, until we get to the point of recognizing that it isn't our fight against each other and putting our arms around each other and saying we all need to collectively, not when the budget's being debated, but well before, and probably years before, because it's going to take that long to overcome the institutional inertia of just this is how it's done. We've got to get to the point that we go lockstep and have that fight with the state and say, your job is to do this. Now, regionally, you ask. I currently am working in a community that's part of a regional school system. Transportation in a regional school system is nuts. The carrot and the stick. The state said, if you regionalize, here's a carrot, we'll give you transportation, we'll pay for it. Well, not only did they not pay fully for transportation, 67% if we're lucky, right? Mm-hmm. That's regular transportation. That doesn't even matter compared to the cost of special education transportation that they don't pay a nickel on. So, again, they've been very effective, and I don't think they're bad people or that they've done it intentionally, but they've been very effective at keeping us fighting each other locally instead of looking at the bigger issue up the chain and saying, hey, this has got to get fixed.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
You've aptly described the situation. How can you bring your skill set to bear to improve the situation that we have currently?
I only know what I've read or what I've watched on videos.
Don't believe everything you read.
I know. No, believe me. I have a T-shirt that says that. So I don't want to presume that I know all of the kind of the subtleties, but unless you have an open, ongoing, again, go back to my stupid little things. Unless you're talking to your superintendent year-round, educating each other about, well, this is what it means to me when, you negotiate contracts as though that's a part of what has to get done, and then say, okay, we have our assessment this year, which includes negotiated salaries, and it's $500,000 more than last year. And I'm saying, okay, well, in my small town, I can raise $500,000 more in taxes each year at max. So you've just eaten every dollar that I have to give raises. Where in my thinking locally has always been, okay, we have to keep the lights on and keep people employed, no layoffs, continue to provide service. And if there are crumbs left, we can talk about wages. Whereas on that side of the table, wages become part of the base ask. So we've done a lot of work in educating each other about how that thinking works. And I think it's important. So you got to talk, and you got to educate, you got to adjust. So the superintendent, presumably, would then, with better education about what it means on our side, adjust, and then take that information back to the bargaining table or back to the committee. And then you got to be able to measure it. At the end of the day, how'd the budget work out? What's the measurement? Did everybody get enough of what was available to make it work? So absent being able to have the magic wand at the state level, I go back to this thing, team. Talk, educate, adjust, and measure.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Jim, Tracy Post, next question.
You talk about team and communication is key. Can you be specific about your communication style with not just the board? You just talked about kind of with the school district, but with our volunteer boards as well as with the public in general, your day in, day out, what your communication style is. And
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems trite to say I have an open door policy because I hate that. I have work to do. And as much as I want to say I have an open door policy, and I do, if you have to talk to me, my door's open to you. But I'm not about sitting around gabbing just because my door's open. So I hate, just a side note, I hate saying open door policy, but from the top down, communicating with the board. Technology today, if people text, I have a group text with my selectmen. They don't respond back to it because we're not going to get into open meeting law stuff. But if I'm driving home and I see something on the side of the road, or I'm stopping to get a gallon of milk and somebody tells me something that's important that they may get whacked upside the head, when they go to, get their loaf of bread, I'm just going to send a quick text because it's instantaneous. It's in their pocket. They don't have to be at their desk looking at their computer, and they're informed. I try to do as much real-time communication with the board as is possible, unless I'm told by a member, stop it. I'm sick of my phone buzzing or, blinking, and then I'll stop. I've had some members that believe it or not, don't have cell phones. Had a 36-year selectman that still typed on what I think Ted Kaczynski borrowed to do his manifesto. I mean, it was literally like 3 sentences of typewritten stuff. I've got a stack this thick. I'm going to publish him someday. The Confessions of a Tree Limb Pothole Politician. It's wonderful stuff, but he didn't want any part of that. But I've got to communicate regularly and instantly in terms of things that I think you might get hit on. I do regular reports at a selectmen's meeting, so there's a formal piece of paper or 2 or 3 that'll have, there's a finance, there's a personnel, there's a project, and a miscellaneous. And whatever's gone on in the 2 weeks that, since we last met, you're going to find on that report. So that's a document that's available that you have in advance of a meeting to be able to prep, to be able to poke at me on TV if you want, whatever your pleasure. Email on a regular basis. My wife goes crazy because my phone, I have literally like 42,000 emails on this. I don't know where they live. They show on this, but they're up in the cloud somewhere. But I email incessantly because, again, you have to know what's going on as the board. And I need to know that you know. So it's important for me, self-preservation mode. It's important for me to be able to say, actually, Tracy, I sent that to you. So going into the organization, I think it's important to have regular department head meetings. It's easy for them to devolve into gripe sessions. I've seen it happen. One thing that I've had fun doing is having a department head chair each meeting, each month. A new department head chair the meeting, and they get to pick next month's chair. So they get a kick out of it too because they get to drag somebody else out. So I think department head meetings on a regular basis. I think finance team and public works and facilities teams having subgroups, because not everybody wants to hear in a department head meeting what's going on in the water division, but the folks in the highway, water, and parks definitely want to spend more time on those things. So I think having the big department head meeting and then subgroup meetings. Everybody in the organization has my cell phone. I get calls day, night, weekend. I'd rather get a call at 2 in the morning and address something than wake up to something that's 10 times as bad. So I just think, again, talk as much as you can, up and down the chain.
Good. Mike Stone.
Jim, it's pretty obvious that you love acronyms. When you and Eric and I were talking at the initial
You're the one that
interview,
made one up, though, Mike.
you
You didn't hear me.
you had your SMILE acronym. Today, I noticed in the supplemental materials, you have TEAM.
Yep.
And you have T is for talk, E is for educate, A is for adjust, and M is for measure. And I want to talk about one of those letters in a moment. But when I used to coach youth sports, I used to have stenciled on the kids' practice shirts TEAM, and what it meant was together everyone achieves more. That was the message that I sent them. But the one I'm interested in is adjusting.
Yep.
You write in your materials that any dynamic organization, particularly a full-service municipality, we must recognize that situations may require us to adjust scope and, in some cases, the prioritization of our collective efforts. We must be open to remaining nimble and ready to pivot as may become necessary given the situations on the ground at any given time. And I'll stop there. There's a little bit more than that. I've really seen in my time on the board, in terms of administrators, not necessarily the head person, but let's say in the 1-2 of administrators and assistant administrators. Two types: those who can pivot. They have ideas, they come before the board, they find out that the board has different ideas, different opinions, and they can pivot, and others that bring back the same concept under 100,000 different guises.
Right.
Which type are you, and what makes you, what do you have in your background that makes you adaptable to a change in plans, a change in ideas, and if you can give me some examples where you've done that.
Sure. I'd be lying if I said that I'm not a little of both. Okay, I'm sorry. If I have something in my mind that I'm convicted of is really good for the community, I might come back at you a couple times. I won't hide it and put lipstick on it and call it something else. But I may, one of the times we're sitting down for a cup of coffee, I may push back a little bit and try to say, maybe I'm not communicating. This is what I'm really thinking, and you'll tell me, okay, Jim, I understood the first time. Now shut up and don't bring it up again. But I'm a little of both. So I'm adaptable and I can pivot, but I also sometimes will continue to push. Generally not publicly, because it's inappropriate and unprofessional for me to presume to substitute my judgment for that of the board. My job is to talk and to educate to the best of my ability, and then to let you deliberate and make a decision. You make the decision, I walk out the door and march, right? So I think an example of having to change and be nimble is, I'll go back to what I said to Mr. Horgan about the industrial park project, that really cool project we were able to put together from a bunch of pieces. We got to one point in it where we needed money to be able to bring the three-phase power down. And there were no grants available for, interestingly, you can find water and sewer and 1,000 different things, but for electricity, there's nothing out there. It's really a weird thing that there's not a program to find grant funding to bring electricity for industrial development. So there was a parcel of land directly across the state highway sitting behind a little commercial piece that went up. It was about 1,000 acres of land, and at that time, it was in Chapter 61, so it was protected forestry land. So they were actively doing forest product work, and they got a tax break on it. It changed hands, and it was a little slippery the way it changed hands. The proper notices weren't given that should have been given. When you sell chapter land, you're supposed to give the town first right of refusal to purchase it because the town's been gracious to let them have the tax break, those types of things. Entirely by accident, caught wind of the fact that this thing had transferred and we didn't get notice. I won't tell the long story, but at the end of it, we put together a state grant and some tax title money that we had just taken in that was unexpected during the year. It hadn't been planned on. And we purchased that land, brought in 1,000 acres of conservation land to be preserved in perpetuity, and then sold the CR rights, made money out of that, and was able to put that into the project to get the electricity taken care of. So that's an example where, Mike, I think we had to pivot. We were at a dead end. It looked like we were really stuck and didn't know where to go. We pivoted and ended up doing another fun thing and did an environmental preservation project and an open space project and generated the money out of that to keep the project across the street going. The open space is called 19th Hill, and the industrial park across the place is called Hillview, because now from the top of the industrial park you look out and you see the hill. So it's kind of cool.
Very good. Eric Tolley.
Thank you. Here in Yarmouth, we're very fortunate to have many, many hardworking volunteers that serve on a variety of boards, committees, and commissions, some of which are very involved in the budgeting process. Can you explain to us your process of developing the annual budget and how you work to bring all the relevant players, department heads, volunteer boards together to assist you in developing that budget?
Sure. I always get a kick out of it when you see documents in communities that show the the budget schedule, the budget timeline. In September, revenues will be forecasted. In October, you'll have a financial summit with the school and the selectmen and the FinCom, as though budget starts in the fall. I mean, we start our budget the day after town meeting because, again, to Mike's point, you have to be nimble. You have to know that, you're building your budget 18 months in advance of that last month of that fiscal year, where you're presuming you know what the heck is going to be happening in the world. So, when we hit, the end of May and have had our town meeting, we're already starting the next budget cycle. And it's foolhardy to think that paid staff are doing the work in a vacuum, because we're not. I mean, I watched your finance committee the other night. Tuesday night I don't know what night they met, but I watched their meeting, and what a brilliant group of people that know what to ask. And on the other side of the table, you had natural resources there, and Carl, whose last name I do not know. What a pretty cool guy to listen to, talking about types of things that need to take place from a natural resources perspective in town. That's just an aside. So volunteers are imperative, and they, as my mayor used to say, they're bee people. They'll be here before you, they'll be here during you, and they'll be here after you. So I'm a transient. I can come in and I can say that I'm gonna work for 15 years as the town administrator, but there are people that are gonna long outlast me. Those are the people that deserve the credit for, again, taking a 10,000-foot view and looking at, there have been blips, but all in all, things have been really smooth and nice. And it's the volunteers, finance committee. When you're working on budget, you need, again, talk about team. You got to go to each committee, each department, and have that talk, open and honest, educate each other back and forth. Carl, I get it that, the wall at Bass River needs to be taken care of. This year, it's not in this budget. We don't have the ability, so let's look at other opportunities, whether it's the Seaport Economic Council or something. So educate each other in that process. Adjust as is necessary. Budget is adjustment. It's, I know we told you, XYZ department, that it looked like you'd be able to get this stuff, but we got to adjust because it's been made more clear that this department, after educating us, needs it more. There's only so many dollars. And then be able to measure it. Did we make it? Was it successful? Did we provide the service?
Just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
In Yarmouth, we establish, the board establishes a budget policy statement pretty early on. Are you familiar with that kind of a process?
Yeah. In the back of my packet, I have a bunch of questions I asked about that, which I don't want to take up public time on. Sure. But even if you don't consider me further, I'd love to talk to somebody about them, because there's some neat things in that. So.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Eric.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to that
Go ahead.
point, Eric. I didn't mean to imply in my answer that having a timeline and a process isn't important, because as the chief policy setting body for the entire community, there's no bigger policy statement than your budget, right? I mean, that is policy enacted. So, you need to have a budget priority statement, and that's a very important base position to start from.
Sure.
I didn't want to
No.
sound like I was not acknowledging that.
No, I understand. Thank you.
No, and if I could just add, it's all basically buried in our charter.
Yeah.
So the specific requirements are all there with the timeline as well.
I'm a charter geek. I actually read charters.
That's good. That's
No,
good.
it's not. It's a sickness.
No, actually, trust me, it is. It is. It's basically our Bible. It's our Constitution.
No, it is.
We all need to know what's in it. In 2011, the town of Yarmouth did a financial management review to
I've
take a
read it.
look at,
Yeah, I've
and
read
you've read it, which is good. That's terrific. And it's helped us a lot in terms of strengthening the town's financial management. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in is your thoughts about Yarmouth is now we're talking about doing another one so that we can take additional steps to strengthen our finances and our management and so forth. We are very interested in pursuing a AAA bond rating. We really want to continue to strive towards excellence in terms of financial management. So we're always keen in how the rating agencies look to us and how they evaluate us, and particularly how they look at our management structure and how they look at our budget. And so this is stuff that we talk about with some regularity here as a board, so we're interested. So now, as a former administrator, I'm interested in the financial management reviews that have been conducted in your communities during your tenure, and we would appreciate getting those. We'd also appreciate getting any prospectus or rating evaluations from the towns as they relate to S&P and Moody's.
Sure.
Just some weekend reading when you get the chance.
It's charters for me, and it's
Sorry?
bond ratings for you and charters for me.
Yeah, there you go. Bingo. So in any event, so that's very helpful. We've asked all the candidates to do that. I wanted to sort of segue into this point that you raised earlier that you wanted to have a chance to talk about, and that is the financial situation and the challenges in Winchendon, where there was some deficit issues, financing issues, financial problems, and there was a great deal of political upheaval in the community. As you know, here on Cape Cod, with some of the free time people have, they Google a lot, and they read about these stories. So I'm interested in hearing.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in hearing your take on what happened in Winchendon and why it was such a upheaval in that community.
Starting at the beginning of your question,
Yes.
I think DOR's Division of Local Services, financial reviews are a really important piece of our work, to have outside eyes,
Yes.
kind of that don't really have the same stick that the bond rating agencies have. The stakes aren't as high, but they give us a peek at what an outside person's perspective is on how we're doing things. So I share your position that they're really important to do. Your 2011 one, looks like you've done the collector-treasurer combination. You're no longer showing offset receipts. You have HR person, it looks like. So, I was really happy to look at the things they recommended and see that you guys have ticked off the list. So, kudos to you. So now to the fun stuff. Town of Winchendon. The town of Winchendon has, at the time that I started in 2001, had the position of town manager for 20 years. No one person lasted 2. It's a really rough and tumble place. The politics are kind of grab the muskets, boys. The state can't tell us what to do. We're going to secede type of stuff. I was challenged by that. I thought this is really a kind of cool opportunity. I lasted 15 years in Winchendon. Again, no one lasted 2. I lasted 15. I probably went a year or 2 too long, in hindsight. So what happened in Winchendon? The town charter, again, to go to charters, the town charter in Winchendon has siloed in concrete, very deliberately, administration and finance. The only 2 positions that the select board appoint in the town of Winchendon is the town manager and the town accountant, and never the twain shall meet. I mean, it is in the DNA that, from a checks and balances perspective, those are 2 independent entities in the organization. When you ask about failures, I'll give you a quick right up front here. I didn't fully understand what that meant in Winchendon when I took the job. I thought, well, checks and balances makes perfect sense. Of course, the selectmen should appoint one, and this one shouldn't have to appoint to this one, so they have the checks and balances, and I thought that made sense. I didn't look deeper, and I regret that, because what I came to learn over time is that not only is there a concrete silo between the 2, but in practice over years and years, and the town accountant predated my employment and was there until she retired in the issue we're going to talk about. Budget was set by the town manager. So the Board of Selectmen would give a policy directive. I would build the budget. I'd present it at FinCom. I'd present it at town meeting. It would get voted, and then I was done. It sounds strange, but at that point, the town accountant picked up the budget and administered the budget. And Winchendon had bottom line budgeting, which is all at once convenient and scary as hell, because it basically meant that there's no line item governing on what people can do. It's a big bucket of money, and you can change between lines willy-nilly as you see fit. That doesn't exist anymore. So during the course of the year, the town accountant position was called to provide regular updates to department heads and boards and commissions through the Munis system. The Munis system that the town had, I know you have Munis here, the Munis system the town had was a hybridized version, 3 generations old at the time, and she had developed several workarounds. This is all in the DOR report. What the chairman's referring to is there's a 2015 DOR report. It's available online. I'd encourage you to read it. It is ugly, but you should read it. So she developed workarounds to how she could make Munis do the things she wanted it to do. But one of the things that she had done over the course of time was she would let people spend as they saw fit and not make any general ledger adjustments until the end of the year. She would literally, in the month of June, close the door, and what was referred to as her magic would be done, and she'd come out and everything would work. And, had I paid better attention to what that really represented, a failure of mine, I didn't. Had I paid better attention to what that really represented, I would have been a little bit more forceful with the Board of Selectmen. I went to them on a number of times and said, I'm having difficulty getting information on revenue, so I can adequately do revenue projections and create budget. I save everything, so I still have all my communication in this regard. Repeatedly would go, and the pushback was, that's the town accountant's domain. You built the budget, that's her domain. So the way it was set up in Winchendon was very, very much just that. At the end of town meeting, I was off doing other things. The budget was, from my perspective, on autopilot with the town accountant. In Winchendon, we were self-insured for health insurance. So I don't know how familiar you are with self-insurance, but we basically were paying the bills directly through Blue Cross and Blue Shield. We purchase a product called reinsurance, which is you set a cap per claim. So if you have a catastrophic claim, you're only paying up to a cap, and then everything beyond the insurance company picks up. Our cap was $70,000, which had been recommended by the consultant we were using. The actuaries said that a group our size, our demographics, you should see a claim, maybe a claim and a half a year that had hit that specific. So enter the spring of 2013, so 7 years ago, and it still hurts to talk about. The town accountant went on vacation. This is public, so there's no HIPAA violation here. She went on vacation, and she fell ill. Not stubbed my toe, cut my knee, but she was in a coma for a period of time, out of the country. It was near the end of the fiscal year. The selectmen, as the appointing authority, brought in an interim who had experience in municipal accounting, came in and couldn't make heads or tails of the way the permanent accountant was doing things year after year. Spent a good bit of time with another outside contractor to make the general ledger make sense to close the year before even realizing that there was this health insurance trust fund. At this time, we retired out a treasurer collector of 30 plus years. The assistant treasurer collector retired. The assistant accountant retired, and the permanent accountant was in a coma. You couldn't write this in Hollywood. The assessor, to boot, also left. So the entire finance team were brand new people holding chairs and having no idea really where the bones were buried. So the treasurer collector was getting these bills from Blue Cross, processing them, putting them in. The interim accountant is getting them, putting the account number and paying them. The self-insurance trust was on fire. We had 13 catastrophic claims in a 14-month period. So 13 times 70, quick math, just under $1 million. It more than burned our $500,000 cushion that we had in reserves, put us in a deficit position. As soon as she, the interim, figured that out, she came to me, I went to the board, we all went to DOR, and we had a come-to-Jesus meeting with DOR. They were wonderful. They said, okay, we need to do this assessment, figure out exactly what's going on here, and we all game planned the way out. What they came to when the dust settled was a deficit of roughly $3.7 million. So it's 1.1 in the health insurance trust, one really, but 1.1. It was in excess of $2 million of a over expenditure of school choice funds in the school department. There was $500,000 that they added, you know, throw in a little something extra for yourself, $500,000 because they determined that the way the prior accountant was budgeting for the trust was, she should have been doing a 14-month. So basically, when you get your electric bill, you pay your bill, and you know you get another one coming. And at the end of the year, you've paid 12 bills, and that's copacetic. When you're doing something like a health insurance trust, you're supposed to be carrying an extra cushion of 2 months. She wasn't, so on an average of $250,000 a month, they put another $500,000 into the deficit. And then our veterans services, we were in the rough time with the economy. The veterans benefits were spiking, so they threw another 100 at that. So it's 3.7 at the end of the day. So at the end of this meeting, they said, we're going to give you 2 weeks to write a deficit reduction plan, Jim, and we need buy-in from the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and the finance committee. And if you get that, come back to us. We'll craft deficit legislation. We're now in the late fall, November, December of 13. Governor Patrick was our governor. He was about to tap out in the first week of January. Governor Baker was coming in. Governor Patrick and his A&F guys had been working with us, so knew what was going on. There was great concern that if we missed that transition and got into a new administration, that it could be an entirely different lay of the land for us. So I got the plan drafted, a couple of different revisions after going back and forth with the school board, the select board, and the FinCom. Got a unanimous vote on that, presented it to DOR, they adopted it, and then they drafted legislation. The legislation took the 3.7 and doubled it and said, just for good graces, we're going to give you a credit limit of more than you need. It came with significant handcuffs. If you're going to do a borrowing, you need our permission. The things that are interesting, and I take solace in the legislation, was that concrete silo between the town accountant and the town manager in Winchendon, set up by charter, they blew apart in the special legislation. They put me in charge of all finances. So when we got it through the House and the Senate in 2 weeks, unheard of. And then on the governor's desk, New Year's Day, he signed it. For the first time in the 30-year, at that point, history of the town's charter, the town manager had authority to direct, supervise, and oversee all financial aspects. So I set to work at that point to implement the deficit reduction plan. The plan called for us to be about 3 years out before we'd come back up right side again and have paid back the deficit. I'm happy to say that it only took 2 years. Following the plan that I put together, it only took 2 years to come back out. Over my 15 years there, I arrived, and it was barely hanging above junk bond status from the town's bond rating. At that point in time, when this hit, we were at a AA. I was very proud of that. It breaks my heart to know that because of this deficit, the junk, we dropped back down into a high B. I set to work on implementing the deficit plan and doing the budget for the upcoming year. People in the community were rightfully looking for a head. It's not 3.7, it's 6 million. Well, that's what the deficit plan allowed for, but the deficit wasn't 6 million. So it was unfair to expect that nuances should be understood on the street. I mean, people were very upset, and rightfully so, because this is real. It's their money. It's significant. My Board of Selectmen, recognizing what they knew from inside about how the structure worked, what they knew from DOR, particularly that DOR had given me the reins, my board renewed my contract in the middle of all this. So they extended my contract for another 3 years, and the place blew up. There were I don't think I'd seen a campaign sign in 15 years in the center of town until that next day. And there were signs looking for heads. Selectmen resign, town manager resign. The information wasn't accurate, but it didn't matter at that point, because had we not done what we did to create the situation, they wouldn't have been in the position to even be misinformed, because it wouldn't have been an issue. So I committed to the board that I was going to get the fiscal 16 budget done, get it wrapped up, and get Finance Committee's approval, but that it wasn't fair for me to be a lightning rod and drag the board into it as well, because they're well-intended, part-time elected volunteers. But it didn't stop. There were recall campaigns. So of a 5-member board, we had 1 resign, 2 whose terms were up that chose, I wonder why, not to run again, and 2 others that were put up for recall, and ultimately were recalled. I feel responsible that they stuck their necks out for me, not because they shouldn't have, because the facts weren't there, but because the result, the impact. You know, I'm working in another town, you know, a month later. They're still walking around, going into the grocery store, you know, seeing people that were once friendly that are now full of vitriol. So it was a really, really ugly time. I'm happy to say that the ship has been righted. The plan that I put together was actually implemented and worked better than, you know, it was done in 2 years instead of 3. But to go back to you, Mr. Horgan, mistakes. When I first got to Winchendon, had I more fully appreciated the danger of not having eyes on things structurally, I might have pushed harder. You know, when you ask Mike if I would come back again and again with different points and try to keep convincing, I probably should have. You know, the couple of forays I made at the select board to say, hey, this isn't working, I need better access, you know, I got rebuffed, and okay, you know, maybe I should have gone harder. Maybe I should have had one-on-ones more. So the lesson that I learned there is, you know, this is real stuff. You know, this is real impact for real people, you know, who work hard, as I said earlier, to provide for their families and pay their taxes so they can have a level of service provided. And I think as an administration, across the board, myself included, we let them down.
I appreciate your answer. Does anybody have any questions regarding this particular topic before I go over to Dan Horgan?
Can I add one last point on that, Mr.
Sure,
Chairman?
please.
There's a piece of paper in my packet that I gave you in the 30-day plan
Yes.
that is has been very heavily built in the last 5 years as a result of the scars on my back because of that deficit. And if you look at that at your leisure after in that 30-day window, there's a heavy focus on finance, roles and responsibilities, learning not only what people think their roles are, but what they actually are, and making sure that they line up. So, I mean, I took a beating, and I learned from it, and it's informed my actions going forward.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jim. Mr. Horgan.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest. I've been extremely impressed with the homework that you've done.
Thank you.
And the materials that you've given us. You talked earlier about economic development.
Yep.
We're coming out of COVID. We don't know what next year looks like. But we do know that in Yarmouth, over the last 10 years, we've lost about 50% of the revenue that we were getting from local businesses. We have an issue, and hopefully wastewater will help us with that. But what I'd like to know from you is, how are you going to lead us forward in terms of finding means of economic development, ways of attracting it, trends? How can you facilitate making us a desirable community for economic redevelopment?
And this goes to something I said earlier, Mr. Horgan. Sometimes when you're so in the weeds yourselves, you don't see what an outside set of eyes sees. Because to hear you frame it as make us attractive breaks my heart, because you are so prime right now to control your destiny in an economic development, which means tax generation, which means ability to do the wall that Carl wants done. You know, you've got, it's all right there in front of you. The pieces are there. They just, you know, the cards are there. They just need to be played. Okay? So, you know, there's that whole, was it Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams movie, you know, if you build it, they will come. You know, if you sewer, they will come. And I think the important thing that I'd encourage you to focus on as a town, whether I'm here or not, the important thing is to ride that closely and don't just let it happen. Don't let the development that is going to happen, which might be exciting, and you might just be inclined to say, ooh, good, development's happening, let's let it happen. Ride it, guide it, direct it by policy. You know, the 60 to 90 days in my plan that I put together for you focuses on driving that issue and guiding it towards things that are more progressive and future driven. You know, the blue economy that is, again, I sound like a broken record, but it is just so ripe. I mean, I cite in my work, you know, the blue economy project, this document here that I've marked to pieces. I know the commission did a piece as well. There's even the document that I just read while I was sitting in the conference room down the hall. It was sitting on the counter. I picked it up. I mean, it's a Cape Cod Commission piece from 2018 that shows that roadmap. I mean, the pieces are all there. I'd encourage you to look at that 61 to 90 day piece in the book I gave you to do a better job of articulating it than I'm doing now. But my God, you have it. It's right here, and it just takes laying the plan out and getting everybody, again, you talk, you educate, you adjust as necessary, and I'd be thrilled to be here to measure in 5 years. I'd be thrilled to be able to look back and say, wow, you know, remember 5 years ago when we were wondering if this was going to happen, if it could happen? I'm here to tell you it's going to happen. You just need to have the people and the policies in place to make it happen the way you want, not just let it happen to you.
Quick
Yes,
follow-up.
go right ahead.
I'm not familiar with this blue economy that you're speaking of. I'm sure most people at home aren't. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Simply, it's economic development, education even as an outshoot that's tied to the water. It can be tied to either heritage in terms of tourism. You know, there's a thing I was blessed to be involved with when I was in air, getting a U.S. Park Service Heritage Corridor designation. I'm blown away that there's not one representing the Cape.
Me too.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's go. Let's do that, because, I mean, it's basically a framework, a federal framework from the U.S. Park Services. You're not a park, but you are recognized for the heritage that your particular geography represents. So you'd have things, again, from the indigenous peoples that lived here before there was any European, foot that stepped on the sand on the beach, all the way through industrial development and fishing and whaling, roll in some pirates, and then transition and talk about pivot to become a vacation place for the wealthy, and then to become, a burgeoning working class to support those that are here living in big houses and vacationing. I mean, it takes all of that in. So the blue economy takes every little piece of that and tries to capitalize on it. So you have a blue economy now. If you've got somebody that is selling surfboards or somebody that is developing underwater cameras, in concert with Woods Hole, that's blue economy. So what I'm saying is you can have, for instance, you have Bridgewater State across the street. They have a program up in the main campus that is blue. It's not quite there yet, but with a couple degrees tilt, it'd be a really cool blue economy program, and you could drive that down here. So now, Bridgewater might say at any given time, hey, we're pulling the plug up, we got to go. No, you get them hooked. You get them to live with the fact that the blue economy is a program now. You draw people into it. So you've got kids that are here. They're studying about the ocean. They're studying about how to, keep the eelgrass alive or replicate it, or how to. Carl would be thrilled, right? if this stuff came to pass.
Yeah, if I could just add, and to just buttress what you're saying, the Blue Economy is an initiative that I'm part of the group that started this here on the Cape. There's an affiliated group with the Chamber of Commerce. And what we've done is we've put a ton of money into developing this Blue Economy Economic Development Plan. And one of the things that I think we should do is to help all board members and residents of Yarmouth understand it is the next time the Cape Cod Commission or the staff come before the board, we should have them expand on it. But what Jim's talking about is very real. It's very promising. It's very exciting. I think it's terrific that you're raising it because for many other people, they've struggled to grasp it. But obviously, the business community is very, very excited about this. There's a lot of support for it. And to do it justice, we need to give a lot more time to this topic, but I can just vouch for the fact that it's a very exciting initiative, and I'm glad to hear that you're very excited about it. I think it's very, very important.
And I'll shut up in a second, but I just
Okay.
want to end with this one piece that again, it's in the doc I gave you, but you've got AmeriCorps Cape Cod, you know, so everybody knows what that is. But you could develop a really cool program. I called it the SEAS, S-E-A-S, SEAS Corps, after the Peace Corps, right? Where you develop this cadre of volunteers that through Bridgewater having a program, through the commission taking the leadership role they've taken, local businesses that are already in it and might not even know that they're blue businesses, put it all together, and you've got something really, really energetic and focused it'll pay dividends that we can't even imagine sitting here. And that's why I say in 5 years, the M in team measure. I'd love to be sitting here in 5 years and look back and say, let's measure what we just did. Because the cards are all there on the table right now. You just got to play them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Tracy Post.
Thank you. So knowing that you've probably looked at our charter, potentially have seen our organizational structure, can you talk about anything there that you've seen potentially that you would be interested in changing or looking at further? And if you were appointed to this position, what would your number one top priority be?
It's funny you talk about organizational chart. I'm not going to find it because I did. I grabbed your 2019 annual report when I was sitting down there just for something to thumb through. I thought it told an interesting story to me that the org chart started with town administrator. So I penciled in for you above that Board of Selectmen and above that voters. So next year's version, if somebody wants to make an edit,
That's a good one.
you know, if I'm your town administrator and I get to the point, and I'm not suggesting that this was done by design. It's just sometimes that's just how thinking develops over time and inertia kicks in. But there needs to be this ongoing discussion. And to the blue economy piece, Mr. Chairman, people are living it right now, and they're working in it, and they don't even know it. So it's about educating, having that, team, talk, educate, adjust, measure. So to your point, Tracy, my first thing would be to meet with each of you individually and find out what your communication style is. I think it's imperative to know because the last thing I want to be doing, as I said earlier, is blasting you all as though I think you're automatons and all, respond the same way to stimulus. So I'd meet with each of you about what your style is. And it's in the plan, more specifically, in the first 30 days. I'd want to know what your hot issues are, After I've done that individually, I would want to have the first board meeting where, very publicly I'm sworn in and say the words deliberately that, it's about service to the board, to the town, to the charter, and to the regulations beyond that, because I think it's imperative that people hear that, because we don't do that enough in local government. People expect the president, not this year, but
Let's not even go there.
they expect to see, the pomp and circumstance of that, but I think it's important to say the words publicly that it's about service. So after I meet with you individually, meet with you as a board, I'd be out with department heads, boards and committees. I would need to know what the hot issues are that can't stand delay and make sure we got them taken care of. But again, in that 30-day plan, one of the things it highlights is resist the urge to make changes. Because who the hell am I to come in and on day 13 think I know enough to make a change? I think it's a tough temptation to overcome because, you think you're smart, you think you know what you're doing, but I wouldn't know anything at that point in time. So again, it'd be getting in front of everybody and every body and having that conversation. Again, back to the acronym, talk, educate, adjust as necessary, and be able to measure it.
Thank you.
Good. Mike Stone?
Jim, I don't want you or any other candidate to walk out of here with any sense of regret about what you were not asked. So is there any question in your mind that we have not asked you yet that you would like to formulate and then respond to?
To ask myself a question and
Yeah.
then answer it? Okay.
In a sense? Or any topic you want to talk about that you don't feel you had the opportunity to address?
Well, I do want to, and I don't know if it's an issue, but I do want to address it in the off chance that it is. I am not of here. I'm not even somebody that has been transplanted and been here 50 years and still considered as not of here, right? But to some of the things I said to you, Mr. Horgan, about sometimes being so close to things you can't see them for what they are. When you have an outsider's set of eyes seeing things, you can see things a little differently and sometimes more clearly and recognize the beauty and the opportunity that you might not see. I want the board to understand, whether you select me or not, that I firmly believe that it is an asset and not a detriment that I'm not from here. Because, we're all going to have relatively equal skill set. So it's really going to be a personal fit for you. What you think, based on what you've seen and heard today, makes the best sense for the town going forward. But I think a progressive, clear-thinking, truly in it for the right reasons guy like me, it doesn't matter that I'm not living on the Cape or that I haven't worked on the Cape. Now, I know that it'll take me longer to know, who the members of the commission are. I know a lot of the administrators already through the MMA group, but, there's a sense that, and I've heard it from some folks that I've talked to about this opportunity, that I'm really fighting an uphill battle because, I'm off Cape. If that were true, if somehow people were less capable of providing a positive impact because they came from off Cape, look at a guy like Congressman Studs, born in Long Island, and what he has meant to the Cape. And I'm saying that to you intentionally.
No, I'm listening.
Because
You got
I know you've served. When I lived in Yarmouth in college, I spent my summers here. I licked envelopes and did phone banks for him. That's a guy that had nothing to do with the Cape, but has had probably one of the most significant impacts long term on what the Cape is today and will be into the future. So just because I'm not from here, don't lose sight of the fact, I beg, that I can have a big impact for you. Having said that, I have, without being presumptuous, I have secured an apartment already. I don't have hard cash down on it, but it's being held for me. My intention, I made it clear in my earlier interview, that I have raised 5 kids and I've had 22, coming on 23 years of blissful wedded life in my town that I've raised my kids in Ashburnham. And I got 2 kids that are finishing out high school. I couldn't, in good conscience, move them. We work to provide a quality of life for our family, and it would be counterintuitive to take a job to work that hurts my family, and it would hurt them to move. So I'd want you to understand that I would be here. There's a single line in my cover letter that I left as a single line, 1-line paragraph. I would be ever present but never prominent. I want to explain that for a quick second. You will see me at board and commission meetings nights. You will see me all hours, day and night. But I won't be an MC. I won't be holding a big cardboard check. I won't be with the big flashy scissors cutting the ribbon. That's not my gig. That's stuff for you. We on staff make those things happen so you can stand up in front and say, we set the policy, we hired these people, we gave them direction, and look at the results. That's your gig. So I would be ever present. You get sick of seeing my face, but I won't be prominent. Tracy and I talked that I have done the dunk tank in the past. I don't like to, but
He said, I won't be doing the dunk tank. I said, that's too bad. He said, well,
I just, I just want to leave you with the fact that I love this work. I absolutely love it. I believe it's a calling. I believe it's noble. I wouldn't, and I haven't chosen to do anything else. And I'd love the opportunity to do it here. I think you're primed for really, really great things. That's not meant to sound like a closing statement, but you asked me to hit those
That's
points.
fair.
Well, it kind of sounded like a closing statement. Let me do this. Let me ask the other board members. I was going to go to Eric next. I don't know, Eric, if you have
Eric was
anyone.
going to concede his time, given the late hour, in case anybody else had a...
It's almost midnight.
So let me
We've been here
I
since
just wanna make
8:30.
one-
It feels like
I just
midnight.
want to make one quick statement. We're not supposed to ask candidates questions about their family composition or anything like that.
I offered it, so you can
And,
ask away.
no, I just want to explain that for the record. And in Eric and I's interviews, we refrained from those questions, but obviously candidates can offer whatever they want, and we did not make inquiry into those kinds of matters.
Absolutely. No, I wouldn't have wanted to leave it as an implication that you had. I've offered, when Tracy sat down, I said, I'm an open book. I've chosen public life. Everything, warts, scars, and all is public, so.
Very good. Dan, did you have any more questions?
No, just an observation. The address concerned me.
Sure.
I'm impressed by the fact that you've come out of the gate being very honest and saying, you're not moving down here. You're making provisions to be available with an apartment. But you've also talked an awful lot about communication and real-time communication. And I think that's primarily what we're looking for.
I think, to address that for a second, because, again, when Tracy and I had the one-on-one time in the hall, I currently live in the same house as my teenage daughters. Their bedroom is on the second floor. Mine and my wife's on the first floor.
they won't know he's here.
They text me or FaceTime me from upstairs. So if I'm in Ashburnham on a Saturday afternoon, playing with my daughters in the backyard, and something happens, this isn't like 1990 when I first started in this business, where cell phones were the size of this table, and you had to crank them up, and I have the ability to be on the phone instantly, FaceTime, so there's a visual, or Zoom, so there's a visual with the entire team, while I'm driving and it's on the dashboard, if it ever became necessary. But let me tell you, if I were ever in Ashburnham and something happened that was emergent here, and it was life or death for me to be here, we have a bigger problem. Because there's nothing that I'm going to do. Let me undersell the value of a town administrator. There's nothing I'm going to do that's life or death by being on scene. The fire chief, absolutely. Police chief, undoubtedly. Emergency management, beyond question. But I can direct, I can advise, I can guide, I can poke on the phone while I'm driving. So I don't see it as an issue.
I hear you.
And I respect that you may.
I understand.
But I don't.
I understand. Thank you. Tracy, did you have any other final questions?
I don't think so. No, I mean, we have some literature to read through, so.
Yeah, I read through your questions, by the way. They're all great questions, so thanks for putting those in front of us.
And I recognize that I could step on some toes by asking them,
No.
which is why I'm not talking about them publicly. So.
No. I appreciate that. That's very, very good. So unless there are any other comments, I'm going to thank you for your interest in the town of Yarmouth and applying for this position. Regardless of how things go, it has been an incredible pleasure to meet you and talk to you. This has been a very engaging conversation, and we learned a lot about you. And once again, we wish you well, and again, thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent. And if you think I'm interested, multiply that by some number.
Your homework clearly shows your interests.
Yes.
I think I could do good work for you.
Well done. Well, that concludes